Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us Finzel, who is an author, speaker, and trusted authority in the field of leadership. Welcome to the program, Hans.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
You're welcome. So tell me a little bit about the field of leadership in the sense that I think that you've got a little bit of a crowded space, so, kind of a little red ocean going on in the field of leadership. So what would set you apart and what makes you a trusted authority in the field of leadership, kind of from your approaches? And I would suspect that like in any field in business, if you can distinguish yourself from the competition, it kind of gives you a little bit of that salt and flavor. And so just wondering what your take is on the field of leadership.
Yeah, it is a very crowded field, and you might ask, why another book on leadership, really? But I do have my PhD in the field of leadership, so I've studied it, but that doesn't make me a great leader, just having all that book smarts. Mm-hmm. I was a CEO for 20 years. I think that's where I really got my chops. So my stuff is very practical, real world, down to earth. It's not classroom theory. It's from the trenches of hiring people, firing people, running meetings, going after vision, setting goals, strategic planning, just all the stuff related to leadership. So it's very practical. I think the third thing would be just my, now that I'm in my 60s, I think I've gained a lot of leadership wisdom by a lot of mistakes I've made. So sometimes I think people shouldn't write a book until they're at least 50, although my first book I wrote when I was in my 30s. But now that I'm in my 60s, I kind of feel like I'm a roving ambassador of leadership wisdom. I've learned a lot, and that's what I share in the book, and I think that's what sets it apart.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that, like you said, sometimes education, hey, great, that's a nice gold star, but anyone can put their nose in a book and get a degree. Maybe not anyone, but that's a start in the right direction. And then 20 years experience or 20 years plus, okay, great, that's wonderful. But what stood out to me was the transparency of you saying, I've made mistakes, and I've learned from them. And it's kind of like you don't want to hire someone. I've heard many times when hiring managers would say, I want to hear about someone that goes, I messed up. Here's where I messed up, but here's what I learned from it. And I think that that's a really big a piece of leadership. And I kind of always, when you were describing that, the phrase fail forward jumped into my mind. And I always attribute that to John Maxwell, where, that's probably the first time I even heard the phrase, or his book, Failing Forward, and it just means get out there and get some dirt under your fingernails and get some experience, like you said.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't relate to people who write books on leadership that seem everything's perfect, and if you do this, you'll be a raving success. Because my books are very vulnerable about my failures and my weaknesses and my struggles.
And, one of the points I was going to bring up in your book, Top 10 Ways to be a Great Leader, I wanted to talk about the concept of beware of the ivory tower syndrome, which kind of segues right into that from what we're saying here. So tell us a little bit about the ivory tower syndrome.
Yeah, well, the way I organize my book, as you can see, is I love top 10 lists, and my bestseller is, a lot of people know me from my book, The Top 10 Mistakes Leaders Make, that I actually wrote 20 years ago. This is not really a sequel. It's the other side of the coin. Instead of mistakes, it's like, what are the 10 essential skills every new leader should really pay attention to? But when I realized the word leadership had 10 letters in it, I thought, oh my gosh, 10 letters is perfect. It's just begging me to use that as the outline. So you can see that the 10 chapters go with the 10 letters in the word leadership. And so the A in leadership, LEA, stands for what I call accessibility and vulnerability. And today's leaders have to be accessible to their troops. I tell the story in there about a company where they have this is a real company today in Texas, where It's a big company. On the top floor is the executive floor. They have their own kitchen, their own gym, their own coffee bar, and there's a spiral staircase that goes from the lobby up to the executive floor, and there's a chain across that staircase that says, "Do not enter." And it's just such a crazy picture to me of old paradigm leadership, where the leaders are totally isolated and insulated from the common people. And that kind of leadership just doesn't work anymore. People don't respect that kind of leadership, especially millennials. I've been doing a lot of studying on how to lead millennials and how to work well with millennials, and they just demand access to the leaders. So I made the practice of being available, and I think that especially the younger people appreciated the fact that, you know, they could call me by my first name. We created an informal culture, and I think the leaders should be able to, not ask people to do stuff they're not willing to do themselves, and working shoulder to shoulder. That's the kind of leadership people like today, where they see the leader's out there, and that's accessible leadership.
You know, that last point you made leads right into the phrase of servant leadership, which is another point in your book. And I think that too many people, or too many times people that are not in leadership positions, they're looking at that leader to kind of throw rocks at that ivory tower, you know, so to speak. And they're like, see, I knew they wouldn't, or, you know, wow, he's asking us to stay late, or she's not, you know, sensitive to what we're going through. But I think when the team sees that the leader is rolling up their sleeves and getting to work, that servant leadership kind of style, and you don't need to tap your glass and say, now hear ye. I now am going to do servant leadership. Watch me work. Because I think now that's just a put on. So how can a leader effectively display that servant leadership? And I think that you even talk about some unique ways that, you know, some people think servant leadership is X, but it really is Y.
Yes, there's a lot of people throwing around the word servant leadership, but I don't think they understand what it really is. It's not slave leadership. It's not carrying everybody on your back and doing everybody else's work. And I was talking to a lady the other day, said, Hans, you know, I have an open door policy, and I can't ever get any work done because everybody's always in my office. And I'm like, well, you know, that's not really the best kind of leadership. You need to discipline your life and your schedule, and definitely have times when you're available. But servant leadership is just not being available 24/7 for every whim and every, you know, that's the tyranny of the urgent. So to me, servant leadership is an attitude. It's, here's my definition: when the leader cares more about the good of the team than his or her own enrichment. And see, people know if you're in it for yourself as a leader or if you're in it for the team. It's the old saying, if I help the team get what they want, I'll get what I want. And it's a shift that I had to make in my own career. When I was in my 30s, I was pretty arrogant, full of myself. I thought I was God's gift to the world. You know, I was going to light the world on fire. And I had a team of people that I was leading, and they rose up against me. And they didn't like my leadership, and they pretty well rejected my leadership. And I was in my mid-30s, and I said, why? And they said, Hans, you don't care about us. It's just about your agenda and what you're going to get done in your career and your goals. You're really smart and gifted, but you don't care about us. And that's when I learned about servant leadership. It's making the shift from me to we. So important.
Yeah, and I love that analogy of, you know, servant leadership is not slave leadership, because I almost think that, you know, the mentality of the customer's always right, you know, for years and decades. That was like, that's the mantra. But in reality, the customer's not always right, and sometimes you have to say no. And sometimes when raising your kids, you don't get that participation award. Some team has to actually win the game. Sorry, you know, things happen in life, and there's a winner and there's a loser in a soccer game. Or, you know, the customer, hey, you know, you whatever the scenario is. You have to kindly deal with that. But it really makes me think when you said servant-slave leadership, sometimes the team could get so much into their own mindset that they feel like, oh, I saw the leader doing X, so now they ought to do Y, Z, and everything else in between.
That's right. The employee's not always right either.
Yeah.
Right.
But and you can deal with that in the right way. It has to be well put and well said, and I think you can make that point graciously where some other leader may make the same point and it comes off totally different, and you could take the written text of this response from this leader and the written text of this response and go, I said the same thing, and you're like, yeah, but look, the tone was different. So I think you touched on your earlier career in your 30s of where your team kind of didn't resound with your style. What's another tip/failure that you learned from in your past?
Well, I think actually the last chapter in the book, I tell the story of that failure, and the P in leadership I call stands for the power of humility. And I think if you were to ask me what's the most important trait or character quality of a great, effective, lifelong leader, I would say humility. And humility, that story I told you about that crushing defeat, that was my road toward humility. And sometimes people are too arrogant and full of themselves, and those are the worst kind of leaders. They're dictators. They don't listen. They think they're always right, and that's the opposite of a humble leader. And humility is not weakness. Humility is saying to yourself, I may be the boss, I may be on the top of the org chart, but that doesn't make me the most important person in the room. And they're not all here to serve me. I'm happen to be the quarterback, but we'll never score a single point without the entire team. That's humility.
Yeah, and also kind of layering in, transparency along with that, where that leader can say, hey, we tried this project, and guys, it didn't work. And maybe it's kind of like, let's all of us roll up our sleeves and figure out what went wrong and how we can work on this together, not this didn't work and it was Billy's fault and, how dare you, and
right.
And I think that unfortunately many times that happens, that something goes awry and a leader doesn't want it to blow back on them, so they find ways to go out of their way to make sure that upper management sees it wasn't the leader's deal, and they try to pin it on or allude to the fact that it was the team. So can you speak of some times where that may happen and just some ways to kind of work around that?
Well, actually, let's talk about the very first letter in the word leadership. The L in leadership, to me, the two most important words in a leader's vocabulary are listen and learn. L and L, listen and learn. And that's what I had to learn, to be a good listener. And when I do a lot of speaking on leadership, and I ask my audiences, how many of you have worked for a terrible boss? You can guess how many people raise their hand. I'm always surprised. Pretty well everybody raises their hands. And that's
because their bosses are sitting right next to them.
I'm on the right track, because that's what I'm trying to address. And when I dig down and ask people, what are the reasons that boss is so terrible? So many times I hear this theme, my boss never listens. They won't listen to us. They think they know everything. And it's no fun working in an environment where the leadership or the boss just won't listen. Because, the people on the front lines of an organization, whether you're selling something, whether you're in sales or in service, the people on the front lines delivering that sale or that service know the best. They know the most about how the customers are accepting that product or that service. And if the leader doesn't listen, it's crazy. But a lot of founders get into that trap. I have a lady I'm working with right now, and she's in a company that's very successful, but it's run by a crazy founder who invented a product that's getting a lot of traction, but he's the worst leader you can ever imagine. He's the leader because he founded the company with a great idea, but he doesn't know how to listen, and he definitely won't learn and won't ever admit, wow, I was wrong, or I'm not approaching this properly. This guy is always right. And that's terrible leadership, in my opinion.
And I think everyone can think, like as you were describing that, I can think of someone I know that is the exact same way in my sphere of influence. So I think we can all think of that. And it made me think of another point. We'll close with this last question, which is, I think that in some, let's call it an industries or levels of leadership, a leader looks differently. And here's where I'm getting at. Let's say that you are a leader in a large, international consulting firm. That leader is going to be groomed and look and act differently than a leader of a large sales organization. And where I'm thinking of is that sales leader, sales manager may have been promoted up through the ranks because they just knocked the socks off of their sales numbers, and their superiors thought, you'd be a good leader, let's get you in there. And there could be a big difference between a sales superstar and a sales leader as compared to someone that, is the VP of X in this other industry, because they are purely proving that they can move teams and achieve desired results. Have you seen that kind of dichotomy there, or that contrast?
Absolutely. It's what's the old Peter principle, where people are promoted to their level of highest ineffectiveness, where you're so good as a technical skill. I was on a podcast the other day for real estate agents, and we had this very discussion about this big real estate company that's being led by the guy who was the star salesman, sold more homes than anybody else, So he's now running the company, and he's a horrible leader. And so that happens all the time. Your technical success or your sales success or your frontline success gets you promoted. So my advice to people like that is, hey, you got to completely act differently now. You don't do when you're in leadership what you did when you were in sales. And you have to study leadership. This is exactly why I write books on leadership for people like that. Study the craft. Learn to be a better leader. Being open to input, and it's really a whole different discipline to lead a team than it is to be successful in what your profession was that got you into leadership.
And I would, if you could wave a magic wand, there's a certain percentage of people in leadership that are just like that star salesperson. It's out there. It's not an anomaly. So when that happens, do you feel like there's a way that person, if they're willing to listen and learn, but are they able to be groomed and polished up as a better leader, or is it like they are just always that superstar sales type person and just swap them out, right?
That's the question. Are leaders born or are they made? Can you grow to be a great? And I think you can grow to be a great leader if you're willing to listen and learn. I've seen it happen. The biggest problem I see is that people aren't open to that. I get the question so much, how can I lead my boss? How can I help my boss learn that they have terrible blind spots? So if they're open to listening and learning, absolutely, you can develop into a great leader, even if you're not born with leadership skills, so to speak.
Well, and also, even though in that scenario someone could grow to be a good leader if they're willing to listen and learn, it'll just take a lot more work. As opposed to someone that is that quote-unquote born leader, things just come naturally, and it just seems to just flow. Kind of like, I've got a daughter that's just a math superstar, and it just comes easily, and she just knocks your socks off. How in the world do you know that? And then, someone else might go, I can barely do whatever, and so, yet my math superstar daughter might struggle in some other area. So I think that your areas of expertise and the work you put into it, you're going to get there, but then is it really kind of that highest and best use of your, abilities?
Yeah, well, that depends on a lot of factors,
Mm-hmm.
But, I do see some people in leadership, and we all do, say, why are they in leadership? Or they shouldn't be in leadership. But, it happens in all disciplines, and so my passion is just try to help those people improve their game as long as they are in leadership.
Yep. Well, hey, Hans, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful getting to know you. What is the best way to have people learn more about your books, your latest ones, your body of work, and what's the best way they can reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, best way is my website, hansfinzel.com, HANSFINZEL, hansfinzel.com. All my stuff is there, and I'd love to interact with anybody who's interested.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Hans. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me on your program.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.